Picture yourself unearthed within the exact location you chose for solitude, face down, hands tied, each finger deliberately fractured. Such was the fate of 2 out of 3 hikers in North Carolina's woodlands. The third lay beside them. This narrative isn't about how individuals get lost in the woods. It delves into what awaited them. The Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina spans a vast expanse, encompassing numerous acres of trees, mountains, and rivers. It serves as an escape for many. Hikers venture there with tents and backpacks, traversing trails and gathering around campfires, a typical setting for a routine holiday. In the summer of 2019, 3 companions, Mark, Jenna, and Kevin, opted to spend their weekend there. They weren't novices. They had decent equipment and were well versed in woodland etiquette. They selected an authorized camping spot. In a frequently monitored woodland region instead of a remote wilderness, they had settled down for the night on Friday. Their actions were appropriate. They established their sizable 3-person tent, ignited a fire, and likely prepared dinner, everything proceeding as planned. They were at the designated location, carrying out the expected activities. The previous sighting of them was by fellow tourists who passed by their campsite in the evening, exchanging friendly waves. This was nothing extraordinary or alarming, merely 3 youths appreciating nature. By the following morning, around 8 on Saturday, 2 forest wardens patrolling their regular route in an old pickup truck spotted smoke rising from the clearing. Such smoke wasn't entirely uncommon. Tourists often start fires early for breakfast or warmth. However, this particular smoke seemed unusual to them. Dear friends, please help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Please like and subscribe to our channel. It will motivate us to make more videos like this for you. The morning light was not sufficient for a proper campfire, yet it was too dense for smoldering embers. An unsettling haze filled the air. Ranger Gary, the elder among them, pulled out his binoculars, scanning towards the clearing. All he could make out were treetops obscured by smoke. He blew his whistle, a long blast, the standard call to catch someone's attention. Normally, tourists would respond with shouts or waves, but this time there was no reply. After a moment, he repeated the signal, this time with 2 short blasts. Still, there was no response, not even a sound. His younger companion shrugged. Perhaps they had gone to gather water at the stream, or maybe their hearing was poor. But Gary, with his 20 years of experience in these woods, recognized that silence could have different meanings. The soothing quiet of dawn contrasted sharply with this tense, anxious quiet. This was the latter. They decided to drive up and investigate. They had to walk the final 200 meters on foot along the tight path leading to the glade due to its narrowness, leaving their pickup behind. Upon approaching, they called out, "Forest Rangers, are you all right?" However, there was only the sound of crunching branches underfoot and silence in response. When they reached the clearing, they stood in confusion as the fire seemed about to be extinguished. The same wisps of smoke were still rising from it, indicating that it had recently been abandoned. The tent's usual location on the ground was marked by flattened grass, forming a clear rectangular pattern. Yet, both the tent and the tourist's vehicle, which should have been parked in a small lot at the trailhead, were nowhere to be found. All the foresters could find within the clearing were 3 empty beer cans, a package of sausages near the campfire, and a camping fork nearby. This was highly unusual as there were no backpacks, sleeping bags, clothes, or people in sight. Seasoned hikers never abandon smoldering campfires. It's the primary safety rule in the woods. One might wonder where they could have moved without their equipment, especially their tent. The tent, being a large 3-person one, isn't easily transportable. Gary communicated this situation to the central station via radio, reporting an abandoned camp, describing the missing people and gear, including the fire. He was instructed to search the area, speculating that they might have taken a short walk and encountered trouble. The forest rangers dispersed, with Gary following a path further into the woods while his partner ventured towards the nearest stream. They called out names yet unknown, simply, "Hey, where are you?" They sought tracks, suspecting an injury like a twisted ankle or an encounter with wildlife, although such attacks were seldom in this part of the forest. For an hour, they scoured the area with no results. No snapped branches, no signs of combat, no trace of blood, nothing suggesting an accident. Returning to the smoke-filled clearing, their unease intensified. It seemed as if someone had hit pause in a film and then removed the main characters from view, leaving only the background untouched. By midday, county police arrived. The scene was sectioned off with yellow tape, now officially designated a crime scene. Yet, there was no body, no weapon, no indications of violence, merely an empty clearing. Police initiated their investigation. They identified the tourists based on their registered license plate upon park entry. Mark, 28, Jenna, 26, and Kevin, 27, were confirmed as missing, with their expected return scheduled for Sunday evening in Pisgah. Their relatives were contacted to confirm these details. Since Saturday morning, none of them had communicated. Their phones were off, a common occurrence in remote forest areas. However, their abandoned camp, the absence of contact, the missing equipment painted a highly concerning picture. A comprehensive search and rescue operation ensued, involving volunteers, rescuers, dog handlers with dogs, and even a helicopter equipped with a thermal imager. They meticulously searched the forest area, square by square. The dogs detected a scent at the campfire site, but lost it after 50 to 100 meters in various directions, suggesting that the people might have dispersed in different directions and vanished without a trace. The helicopter discovered nothing, no signs of life or movement. Despite days of continuous searching, they found nothing. While investigators probed all potential scenarios, the most plausible one seemed to be an accident. The possibility existed that they may have drowned, despite the nearest substantial river being several kilometers away. Could they have plummeted from a cliff, yet the hazardous zones lay miles away from their campsite? An assault by a wild creature seems unlikely. Specialists scrutinized the clearing and detected no proof, no paw prints from bears or wolves. The second possibility suggested they departed voluntarily. Yet why, and so abruptly, abandoning their fire and certain possessions? And where might they have vanished to without a vehicle or essential equipment? This hypothesis was questionable. The third scenario, the most uncomfortable, hinted at criminal activity. Maybe they crossed paths with someone in the forest, poachers, drug traffickers, or a solitary psychopath. However, there were no signs of conflict. The clearing remained almost pristine. It appeared as though the individuals had just gotten up and left, or been compelled to leave. But how? Under threat of a gun? Yet, where were the empty casings? Where were the drag marks? The queries continued piling, but the answers ceased. The investigation reached an impasse. The active search was terminated after a week. In the expansive Pisgah forest, locating 3 individuals became a daunting task, akin to finding a needle in a haystack, especially when they chose to remain hidden or were skillfully concealed. The incident made local headlines but swiftly lost traction, becoming another case of missing tourists, an all too familiar occurrence. Life within the park resumed its normal rhythm. The clearing was reopened to visitors who unknowingly camped and lit fires in the same spots. Almost a month transpired with scant hope of finding Mark, Jenna, and Kevin alive. Their families were trapped in a state of anxious uncertainty, while the forest clung to its secret. 31 days later, the weather in Pisgah Forest altered. The rain ceased, replaced by the sun's return. The clearing where the trio's camp had once stood was now restored to its former state, with grass growing straight and even in the spot where their tent had been pitched. Visitors continued to arrive and depart. The case of the vanished individuals was marked as cold. Pictures of 3 cheerful young adults adorned a wall in the sheriff's office, accumulating dust. Apart from their families, the narrative seemed concluded for everyone else. Yet, not Gary, the elderly forest ranger, found himself preoccupied by it. The morning events played repeatedly in his mind. The inconsistent smoke and ominous silence disturbed him, as did the eerily vacant clearing that appeared suspiciously sparse. It was a persistent irritant in his mind that he couldn't dislodge. One weekend in early July, he resolved to revisit that section of the forest. He lacked a specific purpose. He simply wished to inspect the area. Accompanying him was his old golden retriever named Buster. They returned to the same small parking lot. Gary exited the car, and Buster leaped out after him. The forest carried on with its ordinary activities. Birds were chirping, leaves were whispering, nothing ominous transpired. They gradually traversed the path towards the open space, and Gary wasn't sure what he was searching for. Perhaps a forgotten item from their previous trip, or simply a desire to see it anew with renewed perspective. Upon arriving at the clearing, Buster behaved as expected, exploring and sniffing bushes. Gary strolled around the charred fire pit and glanced where the tent once stood. There was nothing but grass. He contemplated departing when suddenly Buster halted. The dog stood motionless in the center of the earth square that was the former tent site, whining softly with his snout to the ground. Gary called, "Buster, come here!" But the dog remained stationary. He started digging at the ground with his paws, growing increasingly agitated. He dug deeper, tossing soil aside, and his whimpering turned into frantic barking. Gary moved towards him and attempted to pull the dog away. "Buster, no! What did you discover?" "Is that a dead squirrel?" Yet the dog refused, growling and persistently digging in the same spot. A shiver ran down Gary's spine as he recognized this location precisely. He exerted force to pull the dog away and tied him to a tree. The dog strained against the leash, its gaze unwavering from the disturbed ground. Gary knelt down. The soil in the area where the dog had been digging felt slightly softer than the rest. A faint, sickly sweet odor emanated from the spot, a scent one would never forget if encountered. Gary stood up, his hands trembling subtly. He retreated a few steps and retrieved his radio. His voice remained composed as he communicated with Central Station, but he felt anxious inside. "This is Gary. I'm at clearing number 12. Summon the sheriff. I suspect I have found them." An hour later, yellow tape enclosed the clearing once more, but the mood was strikingly altered. There was no perplexity or inquiry. Instead, a heavy sense of certainty pervaded. The same group of investigators returned, this time joined by forensic specialists armed with shovels and specialized tools. Pace and precision characterized their work. First, they meticulously took off the grass cover. Then they started to painstakingly remove soil layer by layer. The scent intensified. Everyone donned masks. After 20 minutes of labor, one of the diggers' shovels hit something pliable. Work halted. They continued excavating using their hands and small shovels only. Initially, a piece of blue cloth surfaced, followed by more. Gradually, human body outlines emerged from the ground, then multiple sets. The gruesome spectacle that unfolded before them was stark in its systematic nature. 3 bodies were found slightly over a meter deep, precisely where their tent should have been. They hadn't been tossed into the pit haphazardly. Instead, they had been meticulously arranged in rows facing downwards. All 3 wore complete clothing but lacked footwear. Each subject had their hands bound tightly behind them with white plastic zip ties, commonly used for wire connections. The investigators and law enforcement officials, seasoned in their profession, stood mute before this scene. Only Buster's persistent barking from the tree interrupted the silence. This was not a crime of a mindless, enraged murderer. Instead, it seemed deliberate, calculated, and devoid of humanity. An unseen perpetrator had painstakingly dug a grave, murdered them, and meticulously arranged the bodies in this manner. Upon arrival at the scene, the medical examiner began an immediate examination of the bodies in the excavated pit. He identified them as Mark, Jenna, and Kevin. The exact cause of their deaths was initially unclear, but upon revealing Jenna's body, a single yet devastating injury became apparent. A depressed fracture at the base of her skull, inflicted by a substantial, heavy, blunt object. The strike was incredibly powerful, likely causing immediate death. Mark and Kevin, the 2 men, didn't appear to have head injuries at first glance. However, upon closer examination by the expert, their bound hands were the source of concern. This scrutiny caused the professional's initially unyielding demeanor to falter. He meticulously untied Mark's restraints. Upon placing his hand on the spread-out tarp, one young officer couldn't suppress a hushed gasp. Both hands of Mark were broken, not just fractured, but splintered entirely. Every finger, every joint. These weren't simple fractures from a fight. It seemed someone had intentionally and systematically snapped his fingers one by one. The expert examined Kevin's hands as well, revealing the same scene. 10 broken fingers on each hand. In contrast, Jenna, the girl, retained her intact fingers. Frank, the lead investigator who was approaching retirement age, stepped aside and lit a cigarette. Frank scrutinized the scene, the bodies, the active forensic team, the ominous forest that now seemed hostile. In his 30 years of service, he had never encountered anything like this. The scene didn't make sense. Why all this? If it was a robbery, why go to such extremes? Why break their fingers? It was clearly torture. But torture for what end? What could 3 regular tourists have known? Credit card passwords? The amounts in the cards were negligible. That had been ruled out on day 1. Some kind of information. What type? And why only the 2 men? Why did they just kill the girl with a blow to the head? And the question that had plagued Frank since the beginning, where was the tent? It was never found. Not in the forest, not anywhere else. The perpetrator or perpetrators murdered 3 people, buried them, took their shoes and tent, and then vanished without leaving a single trace. There were no tire tracks from an unfamiliar vehicle, no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing. No security cameras monitored the vicinity. The forest concealed the identity of the perpetrator. Hypotheses crumbled successively. It wasn't a drug deal turned fatal, nor a robbery, nor a traditional ritual murder. It was something else, something inexplicable to the investigators, governed by its own warped reasoning. 2 theories remained, both equally problematic. Either there was an unaccounted for 4th individual among them, a friend who inexplicably murdered everyone, or they encountered an entirely unknown entity within the forest, someone who didn't correspond to any criminal profile. There were no suspects, none whatsoever. When the bodies arrived at the morgue, the formal investigation commenced, and the details that surfaced added a bizarre twist to the tale. The pathologist's report was written in clinical professional language, but the terror lurked behind every word. Jenna's demise was attributed to a severe skull base fracture and brainstem damage inflicted by a single deadly strike. Her body showed no signs of a fight. Apart from the wound at the back of her head, there were no bruises anywhere else. This implies she probably did not notice her assailant, as the attack came unexpectedly from behind. Mark and Kevin's cases, on the other hand, presented more intricacies. Their deaths were attributed to asphyxiation or suffocation. It is suspected they were strangled, either by being forced onto the ground or by having a soft material placed over their mouths and noses. The scarcity of struggle marks on their bodies was highly unusual for 2 physically fit adult males, implying that the attacker may not have been alone or used a weapon to incapacitate them before ending their lives. However, the most chilling aspect of the report concerned their fingers. Experts concluded that the fractures were sustained around the same time as the victim's demise, leaving uncertainty over whether they were alive or deceased during the bone breaking. This type of injury is referred to as perimortem trauma, occurring either just before death or immediately thereafter. The perpetrator did not merely kill, but inflicted this gruesome procedure. He snapped one finger after another on both hands. The stomachs of all 3 victims contained minimal food, indicating the attack occurred several hours post-meal, possibly late at night or early morning while they were asleep. This suggested a chilling portrait of calculated and incomprehensible brutality. Detective Frank and his team started investigating their 2 primary hypotheses. The first hypothesis assumed the murderer was one of their ranks. There might have been an unidentified 4th individual, someone who hadn't registered upon park entry, someone unknown to anyone. Investigators clung to this hypothesis as it was the sole explanation for the absence of signs pointing towards an outsider. They delved into the lives of Mark, Jenna, and Kevin extensively, subjecting them to countless hours of interrogations, probing relatives, friends, colleagues, ex-partners. They scoured for any hint of hidden disputes, outstanding debts, love triangles, or concealed adversaries. However, as they delved deeper, the trio appeared increasingly ordinary and unremarkable. Mark was an engineer with a solid reputation, known for his zestful nature during social gatherings and love for hiking. Jenna dedicated her life to a non-profit organization assisting animals, earning accolades for her compassionate and intelligent demeanor. Kevin, the most reserved of the group, was a programmer with an ardent interest in photography. They had been friends since school, lacking any known adversaries. No one could recall a significant disagreement amongst them. The notion of an unaccounted fourth individual also began to crumble. Unanimously, their friends maintained that the trio were together and no one else accompanied them. Their bank records, phone conversations, and social media exchanges over the recent months were scrutinized. Yet, no traceable clue was found, no indications of suspicious contacts or covert meetings. This line of inquiry had hit a wall. Moreover, it failed to account for crucial aspects. If it was someone they knew, what possible reason could there be for him to inflict such violence as breaking their fingers and stealing the tent? It defied logic. The first theory seemed implausible. The second possibility was far more alarming: an assault by an unknown individual or group. Frank attempted to construct a psychological profile of this perpetrator. Initially, he was physically robust, suggesting multiple assailants were possible. Overpowering 3 adults alone is highly challenging. Second, he was meticulous. He arrived equipped with his own restraints and tools. He had planned the disposal of the bodies, either digging a grave in advance or compelling the victims to do so themselves. He left no signs, absolutely none. This suggests either remarkable fortune or meticulous planning. His actions were deliberate. Most significantly, his motive remains puzzling. It wasn't a burglary. The tourist's car in the parking lot held wallets, phones, and a laptop. Nothing was disturbed. It wasn't sexual assault. The autopsy report eliminated that possibility entirely. Then what? It all boils down to those fractured fingers. Frank forwarded the case details to experts at the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. He hoped they had faced something similar. A week later, the response arrived and was disheartening. Yes, breaking fingers is a common tactic for inflicting pain to coerce information. However, this theory failed in this instance. What critical data could 3 tourists possess? None. It might have been a symbolic act, retribution for some transgression. But what? They had just arrived to unwind in the woods. The third hypothesis proposed by the FBI was the most alarming. Maybe this custom was unique to the offender, serving no purpose for the police or broader society. Instead, it may have been an integral aspect of the crime itself, crucial to the perpetrator's satisfaction. This suggests that we are confronting a person whose reasoning deviated significantly from reality, a hunter driven by his own perverted instincts. The enigmatic aspects of this case include: why were they barefoot? It could be they couldn't escape while being guided to the execution site, or maybe it was part of the offender's ritual as well. And what happened to the tent? Investigators scoured numerous square kilometers of forest and examined waste containers within a 100-kilometer radius. They found no trace of it. One hypothesis suggests that the killer utilized the tent to transport bodies from the crime scene to the grave, leaving no drag marks before either burning or burying it elsewhere. This displayed chilling premeditation and planning. He didn't merely commit a murder. He systematically erased nearly all traces of his actions. All that remained were the bodies arranged like displays in his macabre gallery. The sole hint was the trauma to Jenna's skull, a heavy, blunt instrument, likely a large rock or chunk of timber from the location itself, an indistinguishable weapon amidst hundreds of similar rocks and branches within the forest. The investigation proceeded. Detectives scrutinized lists of known sex offenders, serial killers, and mentally ill individuals residing in North Carolina and surrounding states. They also examined those who had been recently paroled prior to the homicides. Hundreds of names, hundreds of faces, no viable leads. The case once more grew cold, but this time it was not just chilly, it was frigid, icy. It was a flawless enigma, an ideal crime if one can say so. Frank had 3 photos on his desk: smiling Mark, Jenna, and Kevin. Photos of their fractured fingers lined up beside them. A void incomprehensible to him existed between these pairs of images. Months ticked by. The initial vigorous probe deteriorated into a sluggish pace, stymied by insufficient evidence. No trail led anywhere. Detective Frank and his crew exhausted all efforts. They scrutinized the alibis of countless individuals. They quizzed every registered hunter, forest ranger, and former park worker. They even probed local legends, gathering old tales about reclusive hermits and those who disappeared in the woods forever. However, these were mere whispers, stories devoid of relevance to the calculated slayings in Clearing 12. The murderer bore no resemblance to a forest dweller. In fact, he executed his actions with the chilling accuracy of a city surgeon who opted for the woods as his operating theater. No traces of fingerprints, DNA, bullet casings, or eyewitnesses remained after the crime. He didn't boast about it, didn't leave a trail of messages. He completed his task silently and vanished without a trace. A year later, the cases of Mark, Jenna, and Kevin were marked as unsolved. This did not mean they were forgotten. For Frank, this case became an unyielding fixation. Retiring 2 years after, he couldn't shake off the images from that case. During interviews post-retirement, he stated that what troubled him most wasn't what he had witnessed, but rather what he couldn't comprehend. The killer's reasoning seemed incomprehensible to him. It was like reading a book written in an unknown language, where letters could be seen, but the meaning remained mysterious, leaving only a sense of something foreign and menacing. Occasionally at night, his dreams weren't of the victims' faces, but their hands, carefully folded behind their backs with white plastic restraints around their wrists and awkwardly contorted broken fingers. Investigators revisited the specifics, seeking fresh interpretations. The shoes, what was his purpose in taking them? The logical rationale lay in preventing potential escape into the forest, should anyone have managed to free themselves. Symbolically, it could be an act of degradation, a denial of their human dignity. However, these were mere speculations. And the tent? This absent tent assumed near mythical status in the case. It was substantial and unwieldy. It couldn't have been secreted away in a pocket. It had to be transported, concealed, or discarded. Extensive searches with metal detectors around the clearing revealed nothing. No metal pegs, no frame poles. This indicated that the perpetrator had taken it with him. Why? As a memento of his act? A reminder of his deed? Or did he utilize it as a body bag to transport the bodies to the burial site, later discarding it somewhere remote from the park? This detail further complexified the portrait of the criminal. A man, both ruthless and meticulous, boasted physical strength and durability. His tale morphed into a chilling myth within Pisgah National Forest. Glade 12 was permanently sealed to the public. Forest wardens enclosed it with fencing and posted a sign banning entry without reason. Yet everyone in the vicinity understood why it was forbidden. The narrative circulated as a cautionary tale, shared around fireside discussions. It spoke of potential encounters that could exceed mere wildlife in the forest. Frequently, the most fearsome denizen of the woods is another human or something resembling one. The scarcity of information fueled numerous speculative theories. There were murmurs about a cult conducting rituals within the woods. Rumors persisted about a family of wild humans dwelling in caves. However, these were mere attempts to fill the void, to rationalize the unexplainable. In truth, no one had any concrete knowledge. Years went by with no new leads. No one was apprehended. No comparable atrocities occurred in the area again. It was as if the perpetrator had arrived from above for one night, carried out their heinous act, and then vanished without a trace. They made no errors. They left no evidence to follow. They merely appeared, committed the killings, and departed. In the end, this tale became a chilling assortment of disconnected facts. 3 individuals who opted for a peaceful outing in nature, an open space and a dying fire. A grave under where they rested, bodies face down, plastic restraints on their wrists, absent shoes, and most crucially, 20 fractured fingers on 2 of them. Each detail serves as a query, and the entire narrative remains an enigmatic question mark that has yet to be resolved. The murderer of Mark, Jenna, and Kevin remains unknown. We don't know their identity. We don't know their motive. What is most unsettling is that we don't know where they are now. They vanished as if they had never been there at all. Only 3 graves and an enigma persist within the perpetual embrace of the Pisgah Woods.